On behalf of everyone at WDAZ, I'd like to thank you for watching Flood of Memories, remembering the flood of 1997. 10 years ago, WDAZ served as a vital information link for its viewers across the region. Through words and pictures, our news team chronicled the harsh blizzards, the devastating flood, and the hopeful recovery. In the months that followed, we compiled a series of our best stories for our first flood video called Force of Nature. This 2-disc set includes an updated version of that video, now in a DVD format. This DVD, Flood of Memories, offers an updated look at the communities that weathered the '97 flood. You'll see how much the cities have changed in the past 10 years and how they're protecting themselves for the future. As Force of Nature has become a way for us to preserve our memories of that time, this DVD is a reminder of how we're looking ahead. We now present Flood of Memories.
We've put up a good fight, but we couldn't quite make it. And for your own safety, I'm asking you to leave the city and come back when things are safe.
Now we will cry, and then we'll get strong, and we'll move forward, and we'll face whatever we have to, and we will overcome it.
Who would have thought, Terry, that water would be a problem in a flood, but they're having trouble containing this one.
I don't know what to say.
What we've done here is probably one of the best recoveries in the nation's history of a major disaster. We were the Katrina of '97 when you think about it.
When we knew the floodwaters were coming and going to top, the people kept working. Our UND students, our Grand Forks Air Force Base, National Guard, everyone, the residents and high school students, everybody still was sandbagging until the very last minute. I mean, they just all fought to the very end. And I think that is so prevalent of the work ethic in this region. I guess the main thing right now is we will make it through. We will have some rough days ahead. You worked on adrenaline, and I'll tell you, you became very spiritual because there were days, you wondered if you were ever going to see the next day. Right now, I think we need to take a baby step at a time and clean up that area, see where we're at. I never thought of giving up at all. I just felt like I had to be an inspiration to the people, to give them hope, to tell them to keep the faith. We were in God's hands, and we were going to win the battle in the end.
Ms. Mayor, do you have any idea how this fire started? A lot of people watch that video and say, how could a fire start with all that water around?
The press almost absorbed me totally for a long time there, so I'd try and keep everything going and attend the meetings that they had, and got a phone call on my cell phone telling me, I think it was the fire chief, telling me that there was buildings burning downtown, a security building. Well, and at the same time, I turned and looked at a television station there and saw it, and it just was like somebody had just punched me in the stomach, and I just couldn't believe it. It was something else to deal with, but we just continued, and all the people that were working there just kept going.
President of the United States, President Bill Clinton.
I couldn't believe that when they told me the president was coming, and I'll tell you, he was he inspired me, because he sort of took myself and our community under his wing. And when he came, I know he could have just, been a cold president, he just gave us hope, and I felt he was sincere. At this time still, I've talked to several people, and I mean, they've got an attitude that is great, but they are hurting because of the debt that they had to, you know, the monies from the SBA and so forth that they had to get to finish their businesses or homes. So there are a lot of people that still have a lot of debt, and that changed their lives forever. My honest opinion about Grand Forks, East Grand Forks now, it's a very, very wonderful town, I think, to live in. They've got everything that people could possibly want. They've got the entertainment side, they've got the new schools, they've got churches, they've got, you know, just everything looks so neat and clean. It looks very much updated. I knew we were going to come back better because I was told I would work with Secretary of Commerce daily, and he said, you know, you have to build better if you're going to build. So I always said bigger, better, stronger.
What we've done here is probably one of the best recoveries in the nation's history of a major disaster. We were the Katrina of '97 when you think about it. And what I'm hearing from FEMA people and other government officials is that we're the star for the nation as far as recovery. So I'm very proud of what the citizens have done and the help from our federal government, our state government, the local government, but mostly the citizens themselves stepped up and stayed here and worked this partnership with our federal government, our state government, and local government. That's what made it work. You have signature buildings downtown that were the springboard for the development, the Grand Forks Herald, the Corporate Center 2, and you have individuals who made significant investments in their business. We have pocket parks with public art. We never had that before downtown. We have condos being built right over here. First time in the history of Grand Forks that people are going to invest their personal residence in downtown in a condo. It's spectacular. We've got apartments being built, businesses opening up, recreation center, government center. It's very exciting what's happening. And I'll say this too, that Grand Forks, downtown Grand Forks is probably one of the most beautiful downtowns in the region. What's happened here is just terrific. Without the flood, you could still have City Center Mall sitting there, which, you know, didn't work. You had buildings that just started the renovation, but it would take, my guess is it would have taken 25 years to get where we are today. And I'm not sure that it would be as good as it is today. We could not have done what we did without the federal commitment. And the federal commitment was there because I think they saw the commitment from the community and the desire of the people and the businesses to stay here and to rebuild. So they said, okay, we've got faith, and then we took that money and we leveraged it and worked hard and were honest about how we spent it. And that's the result, is one of the best recoveries, if not the best, of a major disaster in America's history. And you know, some people criticize us for, or some of us for being too proud about that. I'll never apologize for being proud of what the people did here. They took resources that were given to them because of this country, and they made good on it. A city is defined by its heart, by its downtown, and that's just a fact. And there was a lot of criticism at that time to forget downtown, build a new downtown. And the city council and the city government and the staff, they stood up against that. I have a lot of respect for them. They took the heat and they built it down here. And it's taken time, but now people are proud of their downtown. They're investing back into downtown, and we're proud of it. And when people come to town and they drive around this downtown, they say it's beautiful. It's not vacant. You know, we have vacancies, of course, but it's not decrepit.
Well, what we do, I mean, as you went through day by day, you watched the water elevations of the water rise, and you went about implementing your plan and implementing it, you know, to the levels that we had prepared for. The big problem we have is that as the elevations of the water rise, really your trouble spots and the complications of it rise almost exponentially, because it isn't just one or two areas, it's like throughout the whole system. Obviously the first area that we had water came over the levees was in the Lincoln Drive area, and it was only be a matter of time when that whole Lincoln Drive area filled, and then it was a domino effect as it went over to Central and through the downtown and eventually down to Riverside Park. So we watched very closely to see what we could do to try to stop it, but once it became inevitable, you really started going into a recovery operation very soon. So we didn't always see this stuff. In fact, a lot of this here, we were in the EOC. It was great to see some of this video, which we saw on the news. Speed of the water coming through town was so fast it was washing away any clay or sand that we tried to put down. The crushed concrete worked, and we were able to build that road and or build that levee, and again probably saved tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of damage. A really big, significant one for ourselves on the public works side was to be able to get and work toward building a permanent flood protection project. We took what could have been and typically is a long process of getting a project authorized and even having appropriations we were able to do in less than 18 months, which is a significant feat in of itself. And of course the city, working back through our congressional delegation, was able to do that. And so we were able to proceed with a long-term flood protection project. I guess I feel pretty proud of the way that the whole project turned out, the continuity that has happened over these last 10 years.
I don't remember a chaos or a panic. I remember a lot of fight in the citizens that they wanted to hold back the waters. I think there was a real strong determination. Thousands of people were sandbagging and working the dikes, and they were putting up with a lot of adversity with the blizzard. It looked pretty bad that we were going to lose the fight at that point, and so we started to evacuate some of the senior citizens from the centers and from their homes, and so our people were pretty busy carrying people through those floodwaters later, and we saw the smoke through the window, and we said, oh my God, it looks like East Grand Forks has got a fire going. And then within just a matter of seconds, we were notified then that we had a fire downtown. We knew the waters were deep, and we had put an awful lot of effort into the evacuations. We hadn't thought a whole lot about a fire in the midst of the flood. We all knew it could happen, but we hadn't put a whole lot of effort into preparations for that. The fire trucks went down and tried to navigate the waters, and we didn't have much luck with that. And we saw all the people on the fire escapes, etc. Our main concern at that point was trying to get the people out of the buildings and to a safer place. We had a lot of water around us, obviously, but the problem was that the water was over our intakes on our trucks, and so our trucks became unusable very quickly, and we had to bring those back out to protect the trucks themselves. XL Energy had some vehicles down there that could navigate the waters, and they were putting us up on some of the roofs, and we were putting out some of the roof fires. We didn't get a whole lot of effort on the security building at the time. There wasn't a whole lot we could do. Pretty early, though, one of our battalion chiefs, Bruce Road, he had some friends over in Minnesota, and he was able to contact the forestry service over there, and they were able to bring in some helicopters that actually did some dumping of small buckets early on, that we were putting out some of the fires on the storefronts and also on the rooftops. We had called in a chemical retardant drop, which I believe to have been the first one ever done on a municipal setting, and that kind of held the fire back a little bit. We got a hold of the National Guard. We actually loaded up the trucks on low boys and went back down, and were able to navigate the waters then, and then we draft the water from the river and use that to fight the fire. My firefighters, or our firefighters I should say, there was a lot of determination. There was never a quit in any of them. There was always a can-do. We're going to figure this thing out. I admired their courage. They just kept going at it. They were working around the clock. They were tired as it was, and it was a pretty exciting time in that respect, even though it was a sad time also. Grand Forks is a beautiful city. Was before the flood, and now since the flood, it's even more beautiful. We're back stronger than we were. I'm excited for the Grand Forks future. We have beautiful facilities around the city, so.
As we prepared for a 49-foot flood that the Weather Service kept telling us about, something we'd handled in the past. A lot of teamwork went into preparing for the flood, and as the water just kept rising, and when it finally overtopped the dikes, and luckily it's a slow-moving flood in one respect, so we could evacuate people, but those were things that were not planned for, and yet people responded in tremendous fashion. It was an emotional time for a lot of people to see this kind of devastation when you've done so much work to prevent this, and you're trying hourly and daily to explain to people what's going on and what may happen next, which we didn't always know ourselves because it was changing so quickly. Well, the floods really never left, a lot of my thoughts, because I've been involved in giving presentations around the country, trying to help other emergency management associations, law enforcement agencies deal with these kind of disasters. So it has still been part of my job assignment, I guess you'd say. But I knew back then, having heard stories from other cities that have had disasters, that we were probably in for a long road ahead, 8 to 10 years, where we're at now before we see some major recovery. And the city, for the most part, is much better off than probably we were 10 years ago. It looks very serene when you look at some of these pictures now, but again, it was a very stressful time, and emergency workers were taking a heavy toll themselves and dealing with this day after day. And again, a lot of times video and pictures don't do it justice. Being on the ground, for those of us that were up close, really brought it home. When you're there feeling the cold water, the cold air, even though it looks like a nice day, smelling the fuel oil, it totally added to the experience that you just capture on video only. The fire was a tremendous blow to us. I mean, we'd already lost the majority of the city, and then when that fire started that morning, if hearts could sink any farther, that's when they really sunk, and not knowing what was going to come next. It seemed like we were facing not just this large disaster, but then more disasters within it, and one kept occurring after another. And that I talked to a lot of emergency management groups about is, how do you reconstruct your city government and your criminal justice system, because you lose those in a major disaster like this, and you need both of them to operate. Again, the water there looks like it's a stagnant pool of water that's flooded the city, but it was amazing how much the current was still moving through there. When we had the small Zodiac-type boats, we were struggling quite a bit. You can see a little bit against one of those posts there. We were struggling to go back upstream when we would complete some of our assignments downtown and try to get back to where we landed the boats from. It was pushing the water through town pretty hard. And the police department, of course, it was a really difficult time for us to have to evacuate that building. I mean, that was intended to be an emergency operations center to pretty much last through any disaster, and setting up a new one out at the Army Reserve Center took a lot of coordination. Some very good people who did some very good work at that time. This is down in the Lincoln Drive area. The first portion to be flooded, of course, when it came across on 13th and Belmont, started filling up that area. Did tremendous amount of damage to those homes that were completely destroyed and no longer exist down there. Obviously, we just have a large greenway now. Nursing home in the background did a wonderful job of getting their people out, and those kinds of special needs really were borne out even more when we saw what happened in Katrina. We were fortunate that a lot of the disabled people or special needs people were taken care of by either city services or National Guard that came in and helped us evacuate. A lot of this water, again, that you can't really perceive, or a lot of the chemicals that were in that water, either from homes or from farmsteads, that I remember the Coast Guard actually complaining about their boats they were taking out in the end of the day, and the paint was actually peeling off them. People would step into the water and have a boot fill up and their leg would burn or turn red. A lot of dangerous aspects to this water besides the hypothermia aspect that we were so concerned about. In these scenes that come to mind too is, this is during the daylight hours, and at night you probably couldn't see your hand in front of your face, and it took a lot of efforts on law enforcement to protect all these buildings from any looting or other problems that might have occurred, and we had tremendous help from as many as 31 law enforcement agencies came into town, along with the help of the National Guard, to secure the city. the aftermath that came out of those homes and piled up on the berms, and people lost their life possessions, and not just monetarily, but you know, the things that had sentimental value that ended up on berms, that ended up being thrown in the landfill. It was very sad for people but they did realize, I think a lot of them, that it was just material things. And I would tell a lot of groups that I spoke to after the flood how fortunate we were that we had no loss of life during the response phase of this disaster. That's pretty unheralded, I think, if you're moving 50,000 people out of the way of a flood of this magnitude along with that fire, and no loss of life occurred.
Take a truck, National Guard truck, and take the media on the back and let them see some of the area. So I hadn't been out and about, so I decided to go to the Lincoln Drive area first. And at that time, I was not aware it was over the dike. So when I got closer to the Lincoln Drive, I saw all the water. Then I went to the towards my area, which is about, I'd say, 1.5 feet deep in the street by then. And that's when I first realized that my house was going to go under. So I looked down the hill. I got out of the truck and I expressed a swear word that everybody caught attention, and I looked down the hill and saw it was halfway up the stop sign. Well, I found a realtor and I bugged him to take us around because he was working on his house too, but he took us around within 2 weeks after the flood, and we just were insistent on finding a house. I didn't care what it was. We had so many friends and neighbors, and the whole town was going through it, so everybody was in the same boat. It's not like you had your own house fire and you were emotionally scarred for life because of that. Everybody went through it, so you just kind of buckled up and you felt for the other people who lost stuff, and then you lost stuff too, so we're all in the same boat, so that made it a lot easier. I think we're doing all right. If better off? It would have been nice not to have a 15-year mortgage as opposed to 2.5 left in my home. I would have owned it in 2.5 years. I live in a nice house now, and all our kids got adjusted and graduated, and they're gone, and they don't even want to talk about the flood.
Well, it felt kind of like a war zone, frankly, all over the city, but even here at the university, there were helicopters in the air, there were Humvees, there were a lot of National Guard people in uniform, there were checkpoints, so you had to have credentials to get through those checkpoints. One of the things I think it's important for this community to remember is that before the river actually flooded, the students at the University of North Dakota provided a lot of help in sandbagging. And that's been historically true. When the city's been threatened, particularly by the red, university students have helped step up and do what they can do to protect the city. I particularly remember a long line of cars going west on University Avenue. And my wife was in that line with our kids as they were evacuating the city. Once the water treatment plant was inundated and it was not operable, President Baker said, well, you can't have 12,000 students here when you have no water, so we have to send them away. North on Columbia Road, and from the Bronson property all the way to the west, basically all you could see was water. We had quite a bit of damage. In fact, in terms of actual dollar amounts, we're talking $50 million or so dollars worth of damage. And if you include things like loss of business, we're really talking $75 million impact. Those 75 buildings that took on water, they've got new pieces of equipment, new infrastructure, 12 miles of new steam heat line here on campus. Ingolstadt Arena came after the flood. One of the things they did is they built up that land 6 feet. They put in all kinds of different measures in that building to make it flood proof and also to protect snow from falling off the roof. So Ralph Ingolstadt spent actually a considerable amount of money making that building as weather disaster free as possible. So one of the positive things it did was sort of energize the institution with a spirit of can do. You know, we're going to come back from this thing. In fact, we're going to have a better institution all around.
If there was going to be stability in our community, there had to be some anchors, some that help people with their own recoveries. And the most obvious one, when you got beyond water and some of those kind of really basic elements, was the schools. But we had all the schools come back for that last day, kind of a end the year, if you would, properly. Then we did have graduation. We had prom in the summertime at the air base. We had a full summer school. We had over 4,000 kids in summer school. We were doing, as many others, a lot of things on parallel tracks, if you would. We were cleaning up. We were assessing damage. We were running summer school programs. We were planning alternatives for the fall, getting relocatables lined up and installed and all this kind of thing. Was we took time to get some community groups and have some conversations and plan for the future. Well, we had damage to 18 of our 22 buildings. We ended up losing 5 of the buildings, and we replaced them with 3. So we went down from an inventory of 22 to 20 facilities, counting the Ed Center and other spaces as well. We decided we're going to have fewer buildings, but we were going to have 6th graders in middle schools. We're going to emphasize class size, and that's kind of what you see in our district today. Every building from 97 through 2007 will either be brand new or will have been fully remodeled. Some have had additions put on them. So facility-wise, we're in great shape. The good news about that is that most of it's been on a pay-as-you-go, and we have less debt than we've ever had. And the debt we have is all financed at 1% to 2.5% rates, because we solidified that middle school programming to be 6, 7, and 8 back in 97, 98. And that has led then to the opportunities to have good class sizes, to eventually led to all-day kindergarten. And when you look at those kind of programming and facility changes, bottom line is, when we look at our test scores, our kids are just doing wonderfully well. The scores are very, very high.
I lived in the Lincoln neighborhood for 25 years, and we lived at 1212 Lincoln Drive, and the site of our house is now essentially the gateway to the Lincoln Drive Park. And I raised my kids there. Our kids went to Lincoln School, and we were there up until through 1997. We felt very strongly about our neighborhood. It was a good place to live. It was a good place for kids. The center of the neighborhood for kids to play was up around Lincoln School. The playground was very active, and we felt that we'd gone through a gut-wrenching experience, and we wanted to do something extra to tell the city to remember us and to provide something beautiful to enhance the Lincoln Drive Park itself. We like the concept of Lincoln Drive Park, but we wanted to do something extra, so we developed a wildflower garden. And this was developed over a 3-year period. It's now been turned over to the Park District. We lost our house to the flood protection project, not specifically to the flood. Okay. Other neighbors just down the hill a little bit, of course, were totaled by the flood. One thing we did, we found a very nice neighborhood, and we're happy here and we're comfortable here. And we're well settled in, and we love our neighbors, and we're in a very good, nice part of Grand Forks, not too far from where we originally lived. One thing that cropped up afterwards is that we had our first contact with the Red Cross, as a lot of people did during the flood. And we had the time flexibility and thought maybe a little bit payback would be in order. So one of the major things in my life since then has been to become a Red Cross disaster volunteer. And so I've now put in quite a bit of time with our local chapter and have gone out on quite a few national disasters as well.
Well, the reason I'm here today is I had flood insurance at the original Sanders. Flood came sure as heck, you know, 8 blizzards in that winter, and I wanted to keep my crew going, so I got a little place in the south end in the strip mall that was a restaurant that was vacant, and I got very lucky, and I was open 7 weeks after the flood. And my joke here is I'm an inner city guy, you know, some inner city we have, but I love the downtown. The downtown is the heart and soul of a community, and I wanted to be a part of bringing that back. And I knew that the hard work that these people put in here, the work ethic that we all have in this part of the world, that it was going to come back. It's just a matter of time. Well, look at the Greenway now. Those people that got into the Greenway and got that going, and it's just, you know, this is a hell of a success story here, for not me, but for the whole town. You know, I'm just a little small piece of it, but I just tickled when I look around here and I see the market going on Saturday, you know, Saturday morning and afternoon, the public market, and concerts on Thursday nights, and some Mondays there's stuff. I mean, there's, and now we have the Ralph and the Alaris, and I mean, my goodness, we've really, really come a long way for a little town of 50,000 people to have what we have now.
Sometimes it feels like the flood was so long ago, and then other times it feels like it was just yesterday. I often tell people that if you're going to have a disaster, it's so important that you bring the president to the disaster so that he can see it firsthand. Because I can remember when President Clinton came on this particular day, he told us how rough the recovery was going to be, but he also said, we're going to be with you all the way. And so I have to thank our senators and congressmen that were able to ask President Clinton to come here and be part of this, because they certainly were. The federal government was with us all the way. In both communities, the damage was severe, as you can see here. The homes were lost. We lost over 600 homes and all our businesses in the downtown district. Here's the sign that used to be up, you know, welcoming people to East Grand Forks. And I remember houses that were overturned right by that sign. There was a shed that had been pushed over and pushed up against it. But I remember driving by that often and thinking, are we ever going to be a community again? And thank goodness that we had people who wanted to return, people who wanted their families to live in East Grand Forks, and they had to take out extra loans and help to rebuild their homes, rebuild their lives. But we had that type of people, and very fortunate to be mayor of a community with people like that. It was pretty scary. You know, this was new to all of us. We never expected this to happen. And look at the damage that's done here. And you know, for the people, where do they go? Where do they start? All of this area was taken out. About 400 homes down there were removed from Sherlock Park, and now we have a state park there. I remember seeing the New Orleans stuff this past year, and all of the problems they developed because their partnerships didn't work out right away.
And I feel that that's the key to the success of recovery, is that you're able to partner with all the agencies that you have to work with after disaster. And down there they couldn't do it. But the first thing you have to learn is, Mayor, I believe you take out the problems you have personally, and you have to deal with the community problems. And our first goal was to help the people that had been flooded. How can we get them some housing, and how can we help our businesses get reestablished and new housing in? They were the big problems at the very beginning. We don't ever like to see a family or a business go out of business, but I have to say, I think right now we're a better community than we ever were downtown in East Grand Forks, and hopefully the future will be bright because of the recovery that we've done. You know, what we've done for our communities is the right thing, to make sure that they're safe, but also that new business can come into our communities and new families can come in, and that they're protected.
And of course, as you know, in '97 we lost 456 homes, and we lost a lot of the downtown business areas that have since been rebuilt. We have, we lost a number of residents in the community that we lost approximately. We were at around 8,500. In the last we are back to around 7,700. So we're still down around 700 people since '97. The school district is the one that took the hardest hit in the loss of students. But in the rebuilding of the community, as you can see, that we've rebuilt in the downtown area here with the Cabela's, and in along the river walk there with the restaurants and Restaurants Row. We have rebuilt 626 new homes in the city since that time. So the growth of the city is coming back, and our tax base is getting better and better. This year in '07, there's been valuations of homes went up, but property taxes went down, and which was a great thing to see here in East Grand Forks for the taxpayers. Our industrial park is growing to some extent, and our business climate hasn't been the greatest, but we're working on to increase that over here in East Grand Forks. We now do have a recreational area down in the Sherlock, old Sherlock area. It's the Red River Recreational, and that has really come a long ways in the last 2 years that it's been there. It's increasing every year for the campers. It's a campsite. We've done new boat ramps and stuff along the river, and again, we have the four new schools actually in Sacred Heart, and the 2 elementary schools and a middle school in East Grand Forks, which is really it's a blessing for us to have those and paid by the government. So it isn't something that the taxpayers have had to pay for.
And everything is referred to as pre-flood or post-flood. You have that reference point. But we were closed 1.5 years, and in that length of time, a lot of that young adult crowd had moved out. So it took us a few years to get back on track with that. There were rough edges along the way, of course, and but it just felt good to fight back. It felt good to put the pieces back together. And of course, East Grand Forks came up with this whole concept on the boardwalk with the businesses facing the river and the restaurants lined up, and that was gorgeous from our point of view. Now the Whiteys that we have today, feels right, and it actually did take a couple of years, because I had so many years in the old place. We were riding a good wave, at the time of the flood, and but we had an old facility. This is technically, or as an operation base, this is really nice compared to what we had before. We never gave it hardly a second thought. We wanted to rebuild, and we wanted to do it as quickly as we could, and I think it was, you know, we're part of the fabric of the community and a landmark restaurant, and I think it was important for Grand Forks, East Grand Forks, that we rebuilt too.
They were putting sandbags up in the water and plastic, and water was splashing over the top, and we had people up and down the river. If that ever happened again, I hope they have better sense than we did then. When they broke the ice jam, why, it dropped about 3 feet. And without that, why, we'd have been, it'd have been over, and it'd been very serious. Being able to break the ice jam, and all the people put together and done the hard work of the sandbagging and for the additional leverage to hold the water back, and that was it was so close that it would have caused lives. We were fortunate to save Crookston, because you take East Grand Forks and Grand Forks, I think it was over 8,000 people we took care of through our city here. Those are the things that I remember real strongly, is that being able to help. A good bunch of people that just came forward and walked the dikes. There was just no end to and then of course the college, the kids helping, and I think that made a big impression on the residents, was the college kids, because sometimes when you have college kids, you don't think they were going to get anything but trouble, but these kids coming forward, and but overall, I think everybody that was involved in it put just every effort there was. And to name one person, there were so many people that the hours they put in. And if we lost this addition, for instance, what would happen to Crookston, Minnesota?
Right about this point here. Yeah, when you walk up here, you think about that quite regularly. The flood of '97, we had knee-deep water outside the store, and then that's when we had the 14 inches in the store. It was nothing but mud and water, and volunteers helped us clean it up. And yeah, it's one of those things that it's really depressing. Keep going, because that's our life, that's our livelihood. You have to stay, stay with it. It's a community effort. It's stress during the winter months when you see this snow coming and it's building up, and you're wondering, what's going to happen in the spring. Or it's also stress when you have a heavy rain. We're now with the flood control. We have against that assurance that that's not going to happen, and it just puts the whole community at ease.
This is the floodway portion of the. This is only going to allow so much water where the start is to come through the city of Warren. There's a gated structure there, and we'll determine how much water is to be in Warren, and the rest will just automatically flow around here and then enter back in on the other side of town, back into the river. It's such a relief for the people in the community to know that at this point on now, we're going to have flood control. We're not going to have to worry about sandbags. We're not going to have to worry about water running down the streets and that.
We're standing pretty well at the confluence of both rivers, and we have the Red River over there and then the Pembina River over there, and bingo, we get both. It was just unbelievable. We got the report that we were going to be 59 feet, and my gosh, it's flood stage is only 42, so we evacuated the town. And then we were safe when Senator Conrad came to us and told us, hey, if you build up that dike, you can probably save your town. So we did, and the main part of Pembina was saved. But then the area what we call South Pembina was not a certified dike, and although we did build up the dike and everything, it still got flooded, and we lost 19 buildings. That includes mobile homes where people live, and this area was all bought out. And what you see now is a real beautiful recreation area. So, I mean, that really is a positive thing that came out of it, you know. By April, we're pretty well, we know exactly what to do. We know which culverts to take care of, which area is prone to having problems. We check our gate, you know, where we have a gate there by the dike wall, and we're prepared. It just seems to be a yearly occurrence, and we're getting pretty good at it. We set up a kitchen in the community center, and the dike walkers are there. There's an office set up where everybody can register. It just pulls together. It's really good. The hardest thing for me was to tell the people they had to evacuate. And the other hardest thing was when I got a ride in a helicopter and I went around town. I saw all that water around town, and I was, oh my gosh, poor Pembina. But it's not what we get right here in Pembina as far as the moisture is concerned. It's what comes from the south and what comes from the west. We still have a population, well, from the year 2000 for 642 people. And that's what we had when we had the flood also. Okay. So we've kind of recuperated. But it's just a continual thing, and I just wish there was something else we could do. It seems like we just have to work that much harder. I don't know, it just makes it kind of tough for a small town. But I'm proud of our town, I really am. I think we just pick up the pieces and keep going. And that's the reputation Pembina has had for a long, long time.
Well, 10 years after the flood, it is sure great to come to Grand Forks and see the improvements that have been made, the families and homes and neighborhoods that have been rebuilt, and the economy moving forward. We were really worried about Grand Forks when the devastating floods and fires hit in 1997, because people left, homes had to be rebuilt, communities disappeared, and it was, you kind of wondered, you know, what was going to go on, what was going to happen. And to be here 10 years later now and see Grand Forks and East Grand Forks as thriving, growing communities and important economic engines in our state and in this region, you know, it's gratifying to see that people pulled together to bring this community back. One of the things that I remember being very heartwarming during the specific flood was that, you know, people really pulled together. The lines of education or income or neighborhood battles or family feuds or, you know, those things all disappeared with people working together against a common cause. And today we can see the results of a wonderful, growing, vibrant, rebuilt community because people linked arms together to rebuild their lives right here in Grand Forks.
Throughout history, we've seen how a single pivotal moment in time can alter our society and drastically change our lives. For the residents of the Grand Forks area, the 1997 flood was one of those pivotal moments. I will never forget the first images on the television that showed us this tragedy in the making. I also will never forget how the citizens of North Dakota and Minnesota worked together during this time of crisis. As the horrible images of flood, fire, and devastation were broadcast across the nation, area residents were already talking about the future. They united behind a determination to rebuild their lives and rebuild their community. When I travel to Grand Forks today, I see a vibrant, growing community. Today, the only reminder of the flood is the permanent protection that reminds us all that we've learned from the past and we're prepared for the future. Congratulations to all of you who have come together to make this happen.
I'm Senator Kent Conrad. It's hard to believe that 10 years have passed since Grand Forks was devastated by the worst disaster in our state's history. It was a slow-motion disaster. We had the worst winter on record, then we were hit by the most powerful winter storm in 50 years, followed by the 500-year flood that engulfed almost the entire city of Grand Forks, and of course a fire that destroyed nearly 3 city blocks. We then had the largest mass evacuation of an American city since the Civil War. It was a disaster of epic proportions for North Dakota. One of my proudest moments as a senator was working with former Mayor Pat Owens and my colleagues Senator Dorgan and Congressman Pomeroy to get Congress to pass and President Clinton to sign the disaster relief bill. I vividly remember the fight here in Congress to get that assistance. Mayor Owens came to Washington along with other city leaders repeatedly to urge Congress to approve the funds we needed to allow the city to recover and to rebuild. We went from office to office visiting every senator and congressman who would meet with us. We spent hours strategizing in my office and developing the summaries of the needs of our communities. The end result was more than $1 billion in relief for the families and businesses in Grand Forks and the Red River Valley. That disaster tested our strength and determination as a community. Grand Forks passed that test, and 10 years later, it's back bigger, better, and stronger than ever. Thanks to all of those who made this remarkable recovery possible. It demonstrates how leadership matters. Thanks to all of those who contributed to this success. Thank you.
And I can still remember the moments just with great clarity in the spring of 1997. I remember, of course, being in the basement of the city hall that was being used at that point as a communications center when the mayor received word that a dike had breached. And I could see the stricken looks on the faces of the mayor and others. They understood the consequences of it. And the consequences they understood would be devastating to the community. And I remember riding in a small boat up and down the streets of Grand Forks with substantial water inundating the entire community. And the eerie feeling of seeing a town that was completely evacuated. No one left there, and every building flooded. I remember not only seeing a flooded community that had been completely evacuated, but I'll never forget the sight of burning buildings in a flooded town and the sight of firefighters trying to fight a fire in the middle of a flood. It's pretty unbelievable. And I remember that virtually every night, all across America, the American people watched the news and saw this unbelievable sight of a community that was completely evacuated, a flood, you know, in a tabletop kind of geography in the Red River Valley, flat as a board, a river that just expanded virtually forever and couldn't wind through the community without breaching the dikes and then inundating the town. I mean, it's an unbelievable set of memories. Leading up to that flood were blizzards, just blizzards like we have not ever seen, and snowpack, and so it's you know, a jumble of memories in many ways, but some of them are just clear as a bell. I think also of what we've done since that time. The 10 years since 1997 have been years of building. You know, some predicted that Grand Forks would never come back. I mean, Grand Forks was going to lose a substantial amount of its population. The citizens would be saddled with debt, you know, all kinds of things. The fact is, this community has roared back. We've all worked together. First, we worked in the immediate aftermath of that flood to get some financial help, to get FEMA there. That was at a time when FEMA was at the top of its game. They did a great job. And, you know, we got some help to Grand Forks. We got massive quantities of money to be able to help build, not only to help with disaster relief and help the folks in the community, but then help build a flood protection plan that now 10 years later is nearly complete. And that's a source of some great pride, because That's been a hard thing to get done, but all of us work together, the city council, the county commissioners, local officials, state and federal officials. We all work together. We got the federal funding. I'm on the appropriations committee and on the committee that actually, the subcommittee rather, that created that funding, and it's been a difficult time, but it's done. It's done. We've got now a flood control project completed in Grand Forks that I'm enormously proud of. And it's, in my judgment, going to prevent a recurrence of having a 1997 flood. Never again in the future, I believe, will we be confronted with that kind of a challenge. But a couple other thoughts and observations. One, the determination in the eyes of the people of Grand Forks. I mean, I visited with the folks, in many cases, sleeping on cots in an air base hangar at the Grand Forks Air Force Base. You know, and you talk to them, and you could see the determination in their eyes. They would not let this river break their spirit. They were residents of Grand Forks. They were going to be residents of Grand Forks. They were going to rebuild. And I can't tell you how much I admire the spirit of people who went through what they did and then came roaring back and bouncing back saying, we're here. This river hasn't beaten us and will not beat us. Much has been done. I think this country admires the citizenry of Grand Forks for what they've been through, but more than that, for what they have built and what they have done to reconstruct their lives after having been evacuated from their city by this disaster of 1997.
The Grand Forks flood gives me so many indelible memories, but one I remember above all other occurred at the Grand Forks Air Force Base. That shelter for 2,500 of us immediately after city evacuation. After a couple of nights on a cot, I was getting ready to fly into Washington. There at 5 in the morning by the coffee jug were a couple of 70-year-old ladies, beautifully dressed, hair perfect. I commented to them, for evacuees, you look terrific. One of the ladies kind of straightens her attire. She says, well, you know, some of these soldiers are very good looking. I think that reflects the unshakable optimism held by the people of Grand Forks throughout this horrible flood and then the long build back thereafter. I believe, as much as anything, where Grand Forks is today is a reflection of the character, the determination, and that unshakable optimism of the people of Grand Forks.
The fires burned all night. Firefighters watching helplessly as flames consumed one building after another.
I can't believe, first of all, that it's almost 10 years ago that the great flood which hit Grand Forks was, in some ways, it seems a lot more recent. In other ways, it seems it was much longer ago than just 9.5 years. Now, when we first got the assignment from the Chicago Bureau, we were told to go to Fargo, where they thought there would be severe flooding. So that's where we headed first, I and a crew, producer and a camera crew. We were in Fargo for, just several hours before it became clear that the flooding there was not going to be a real problem. The real problem, we were told, would be a little bit further to the north in Grand Forks, North Dakota. So we headed up to Grand Forks, got there in the evening. By then, the floodwaters had already overflowed the levees. There had been furious sandbagging, I remember, to try to prevent this from overflowing. But I think everyone realized at a certain point that the river was just going to rise too high, that it would be impossible to hold it back. And by the time we got there to Grand Forks, that had already begun. One of the most vivid sights, and I think around the country everybody remembers this, was the buildings downtown, the security building and other buildings on fire. There was this almost incongruous image of the city deep in floodwater while buildings were on fire, and it just didn't make sense. And all the water around it, and yet the fire's raging out of control. Apparently started, I guess, by an electrical problem. Over the next days, the waters continued to rise. The city was absolutely inundated. for miles in both directions to the west and to the east. Hundreds of thousands, excuse me, tens of thousands of people, the entire populations of these two cities basically had to evacuate their homes. Many of them, I remember this image very well, ended up at the Air Force Base west of town, a large shelter there, families, children, the elderly, adults, entire families gathered there. And the thing that was most remarkable to me was how self-possessed, how calm people were. They didn't know what had happened to their homes, and in many cases they would learn later that their homes were damaged beyond repair or destroyed by the floodwaters. But the people there had a calm and a kind of dignity while they waited out this horrible ordeal. Another image I remember very well was going to a house very close to the Red River of the North. The river was overflowing and was coming right up to the backyard of the house, and this family had built a sandbag wall in the back of their house and put pumps down there, and they were furiously trying to prevent the water from getting through those sandbags and into their homes. The water was seeping through, and we would learn later that the water ended up breaching those sandbags and, in fact, flooding that home. Eventually, we hooked up with a National Guard contingent, and this is another vivid memory of mine, is going into Grand Forks with the National Guard in one of their half-ton trucks. Going through these streets, the water was 4 and 5 feet high. Homes, as far as you could see to the left and to the right, in water up to the windows, even higher. Some cases, animals were still stranded on the roofs of these homes, and people already trying to go back and assess the damage in boats and seeing that in many cases their homes were destroyed. The prevailing image, though, for me is the dignity and the calm and the caring that was shown by the people of Grand Forks and East Grand Forks throughout this ordeal. It reminds me in many ways of what happened in New Orleans. The damage to this community, much smaller though, was almost total. And yet there were no casualties. Nobody was killed. It's remarkable that it could experience this kind of flooding without a catastrophic loss of life. And I can only attribute that to the good planning and really the good luck of the people of these two communities. And finally, I did go back to Grand Forks a little bit later after this ordeal and had the good fortune to see, if we can call it this, the silver lining in all of this, the Grand Forks Herald newspaper, which never stopped publishing even though their headquarters, their offices in downtown were destroyed, won the Pulitzer Prize for meritorious service, and it was a well-deserved prize. That paper, in many ways, kept that community alive throughout this terrific ordeal they went through. And I remember WDAZ visiting there, which was very accommodating to us, and sandbags around the studio and the water seeping in under the door, and yet the employees at WDAZ were putting out news, carrying on as long as they could, and much like the Grand Forks Herald, they showed great courage and dedication and professionalism during what was a terrible ordeal for them personally and for their community.